I never meant to get tangled up in this. Honestly, I thought it was just helping. I'll fix the wiring, I said, trying to sound casual, though my hands were already shaking as I climbed the rickety ladder in the old bookstore's back room. The hum of fluorescent lights mixed with the faint smell of dust and old paper, and somewhere behind me, she was moving soft steps that made my pulse skip. She didn't turn around when I muttered something about the loose fan. Just a quiet, almost impatient hum, like she was weighing whether my words mattered. Then she appeared in the doorway, a stack of worn books cradled against her chest, and for a second I just froze. She had that way of carrying herself, calm, deliberate, but her eyes, sharp and curious, made you feel like she saw more than you wanted her to. I caught the tilt of her head, the half-smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and I knew this wasn't going to be simple. "You're making a mess," she said finally, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had a kind of presence that settled in your chest. I stumbled over my words, laughing nervously, trying to explain that I wasn't really, that I was supposed to just help. She studied me for a long moment, like she could read every corner of my thoughts in the flicker of a fluorescent bulb. Then she set the books down, slow, deliberate, and stepped closer. My stomach twisted, not in fear, but couldn't name it. The ladder creaked beneath me as I reached for the wiring again, and I felt her gaze on my back. I imagined her lips twitching, trying to keep the corners up without giving anything away. My hands trembled slightly as I twisted a wire into place, and when I finally looked up, she was standing there, arms crossed, a little crooked, like she was waiting for me to say something stupid, which, of course, I did. Is this okay?" I asked, pointing vaguely at the jumble of wires. She tilted her head, eyebrow raised, lips pressing together. "Better than I expected," she said finally. Then she gave a tiny shrug, a gesture that somehow felt intimate, almost teasing. That tiny shrug lingered in my mind long after she walked away to fetch some tape. There was a silence then, broken only by the low hum of the store. I wanted to call out something clever, something that would make her laugh, but instead, I just watched her move. The sway of her shoulders, the way she tucked a loose curl behind her ear, the deliberate pace as if she had all the time in the world. I realized I was holding my breath. Something about her felt electric, impossible to ignore. Not loud, not brash, just a steady current running under the surface of everything she did. I kept thinking about how she'd glanced over her shoulder at me. Those eyes that seemed too knowing, too patient, like she'd already noticed the part of me I wasn't ready to admit even to myself. When she returned with the tape, she leaned over the counter, brushing against my arm for a fraction of a second. My skin tingled, my heart jumped, and she didn't say anything about it. She just handed me the tape and smiled, small, careful, controlled. And in that smile, something sparked. That night, I kept replaying her voice in my head, like I missed something, or maybe wanted something. I showed up at the bookstore the next afternoon, trying not to let the nerves crawl up my spine like static. She was already there, perched on a low stool behind the counter, cataloging invoices with a precision that made my own scattered thoughts feel clumsy. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old paper, the late afternoon light slanting through the dusty windows, giving everything a kind of muted warmth. "I didn't think you'd come back," she said without looking up. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, like she had a shield up and I wasn't sure I'd be able to crack it. "I said I'd help," I replied, trying to sound casual, though my stomach flipped. She didn't answer, just tapped her pen against the ledger, eyes on the page but shoulders tense. I started fixing the broken lamp by the reading nook, but I couldn't stop noticing her. The way her fingers lingered on the pen, the small tremor in her hand when she reached for her coffee cup, the subtle lines around her eyes that told stories she never spoke aloud. She laughed at something a customer said, a short, unexpected sound, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. "Are you tired?" I asked quietly. Her head shot up like I'd crossed some invisible line. She blinked, and for a moment, I saw a flicker behind her eyes. Vulnerability. She shook it off quickly, brushing a curl behind her ear, and leaned back in her chair. "I've had a long week," she said, voice even but fragile. I nodded, unsure if I should say more. But I noticed the way she exhaled sharply, like she'd been holding something in, and I wondered if she trusted anyone enough to let it out. My fingers itched to reach across the counter, maybe just to touch the edge of her hand, but I stayed still. The silence stretched, punctuated by the low hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional shuffle of paper. I kept catching glimpses of her. How she massaged the bridge of her nose, how her shoulders slumped just slightly when she thought I wasn't looking. She was confident, poised, even commanding in front of customers. But here, alone, there was something tender about her, something she didn't show to anyone. "I didn't mean to stare," I murmured, though I couldn't stop. She gave a small, almost imperceptible smile, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes. It made me realize she was aware of everything I noticed about her, and maybe, just maybe, she didn't mind entirely. I fixed the lamp and stepped back, hands slightly shaking, aware of the closeness we'd shared without moving an inch. She leaned forward to adjust the cord, and for a second our fingers brushed. Neither of us pulled away. Neither of us spoke. She looked at me like she wanted to say something, but didn't, and that silence felt louder than words. The storm hit just as I was locking up the back door, the first heavy drops hammering against the bookstore windows. She was still in the office, papers spread around her like some carefully curated chaos, the desk lamp casting a golden halo around her hair. I lingered in the doorway, pretending to adjust my jacket while stealing glances. "You're staying for the storm?" she asked without looking up, voice quiet but sharp enough to make me jump. "I thought I could help you close," I said, stepping inside. The warmth of the room hit me, but more than that, it was the closeness of her, the faint scent of coffee and something softer, something uniquely her. She glanced at me then, and I swear the world contracted for a second. I moved to help stack some of the invoices, our shoulders brushing accidentally, or maybe not. My pulse raced. The air between us was thick, charged, but careful. She tilted her head, and there was a brief hesitation in her movement, a pause that felt like an invitation and a warning at once. "Listen," she said finally, voice softer now. I probably shouldn't keep you here." I caught her hand reaching for a pen, just as my hand itched to touch hers. Not the pen, her hand. I stopped myself, but my fingers hovered, trembling slightly. The tension in her shoulders mirrored my own. A phone buzzed on her desk, shattering the fragile bubble around us. She glanced at it, eyes tightening. Whoever it was, maybe her husband, maybe someone else, she didn't pick up. She let it ring once, twice, then slid it across the desk, ignoring it. Her gaze returned to me, lingering just a second too long, and I felt my resolve crumble in tiny, imperceptible pieces. I wanted to say something foolish, reckless, but I swallowed it. The storm outside rattled the windows as if urging us to act. But we didn't. We were careful, cautious, both knowing the weight of what could happen. I noticed the faint tremor in her fingers as she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the way her breathing had quickened ever so slightly. The silence that followed was thick, almost unbearable. I wanted to bridge the gap, wanted to lean in, but I knew, somewhere deep down, that words could ruin it all. My chest tightened. I kept my hand near hers, trembling, caught in the gravity of proximity, the pull of something neither of us dared to name. My hand was halfway to hers when she said, "You should go now," and I did, but only my body left that room. I walked out into the storm, feeling the rain soaking through my coat, but it didn't matter. My thoughts were trapped inside that office, circling her like a moth around a fragile flame. I found her in the quiet corner of the bookstore the next evening, the storm gone but leaving the air thick and heavy. She was perched on a stool, arms crossed loosely, staring at the faint lines of dust on the counter. I hesitated before stepping closer, my shoes scuffing the wood floor softly. "Hey!" I said finally, voice too loud in the silence. She didn't look up. "Hey!" she replied barely. The awkwardness stretched between us, longer than I thought possible. I leaned against the edge of the counter, trying to act casual, trying not to let my hands fidget. Her eyes lifted slowly, scanning me like she'd been rehearsing a conversation she didn't want to have. "Do you ever wonder what we're doing?" I asked, voice low, uncertain. Her brow furrowed slightly, but she didn't answer immediately. Instead, she tilted her head, fingers brushing over the edge of the counter, tracing invisible lines. I noticed how the light caught the faint wrinkles around her eyes, how tired she looked, like she carried more than just the day's work in her body. I don't know," she said finally. Her voice was soft, almost fragile, the kind that made me want to reach out but terrified me at the same time. "I thought I did, but maybe I'm lying to myself." I swallowed, feeling my chest tighten. The tension between us wasn't just about closeness anymore. It was about boundaries, about choices neither of us was ready to name. I wanted to step closer, to bridge the silence with some wordless confession, but I couldn't. I wanted to ask her what she wanted, what she needed, but every syllable felt like it might break something delicate and irreplaceable. She shifted slightly, and I noticed the faint tremor in her hands. It was the same hesitation I had seen before, guarded, careful, unwilling to surrender. She glanced at me, and for a moment, the room shrank around us. The air was dense, heavy with unspoken questions. I don't even know how to explain this," she said, voice breaking slightly. I realized she wasn't talking about me, or maybe she was, but it wasn't just about desire. It was about confusion, about a life she couldn't untangle from her own choices. I nodded, unsure what else to say. Words felt clumsy, almost vulgar in their inadequacy. I wanted to hold her hand, to say something that might anchor her, but all I could do was stand there, trapped in the gravity of her presence. The silence between us became a language of its own. I studied the way she breathed, the small tightening of her jaw, the slow exhale as if letting go of something she'd been holding inside for too long. It hurt to watch, to witness the quiet mourning of possibilities that were never ours. She didn't say anything, just looked at me, like she was already mourning something we never even had. And in that look, I understood everything and nothing at all. The ache lingered, pressing against my ribs long after I left. I hadn't planned to stop by the bookstore that evening, but something had drawn me back, an invisible thread I couldn't name. She was sitting on the floor this time, knees drawn up to her chest, a stack of unopened letters scattered beside her. The light was dim, just the desk lamp and the fading evening sun slicing through the blinds. "You keep secrets, don't you?" I asked gently, kneeling down across from her, careful not to crowd the space. She looked at me, startled, as if I'd read something hidden inside her. For a moment, she said nothing, tracing the edge of a yellowed envelope with a fingertip. Then, slowly, almost reluctantly, she spoke. "Years ago, I lost someone. It was sudden, and I never really got over it." Her voice trembled, but she kept her eyes fixed on the floor. I told myself I moved on. I told everyone. But some mornings it still hits me, like a weight in my chest I can't shake. I didn't know what to say. Instead, I reached out just slightly, letting my hand hover near hers without touching. I didn't want to frighten her. "I get it," I said softly. "I've lost someone too. You carry them differently, but it's still there." Her fingers twitched as if she wanted to reach for mine, but didn't. She picked up one of the letters, her thumb brushing over the faded handwriting. "He wrote to me every month for 5 years, she said, voice catching. And I couldn't answer. I didn't have it in me. I nodded, swallowing the lump forming in my throat. There was something human and unbearably fragile about seeing her admit that, about witnessing her armor crack in small increments. I remembered her laughter the other day, the way she could be strong and radiant in public, and now I understood the shadow that lingered behind it. Maybe it's not about moving on, I said, my voice low. Maybe it's about letting yourself feel it, and surviving anyway. She looked at me then, and for the first time the walls didn't rise immediately to shield her. Her eyes were wide, unguarded, trembling with something she hadn't allowed herself to show in years. She drew in a long, shaky breath, as if she'd been holding it in forever, and exhaled slowly, letting the silence between us carry weight. I realized I was holding my own breath, waiting, watching, not wanting to break this fragile honesty. There was no confession of love here, no impulsive reach, just truth, raw and trembling, like a candle flickering in a quiet room. She took a breath like she hadn't allowed herself to in years, and for the first time, she looked at me without fear. And in that look, the entire room seemed to shift, carrying a promise neither of us could yet name. The bookstore smelled of rain-dampened wood and old paper. I was stacking the last of the returned books when I felt her presence behind me, close enough that the heat from her body brushed against my shoulder. She didn't say anything. She rarely did when the weight of words seemed too heavy, but I could feel it in the pause, in the way her breath hitched faintly as she stopped behind me. I turned slightly and our eyes met. No grand confession, no dramatic gesture. Just the acknowledgement that we were both here, both aware of everything unspoken. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, like a truce between two people who had skirted edges for far too long. She started, then stopped, lips pressing together. I didn't interrupt. There was no rush. The quiet was enough, thick with the gravity of all we hadn't said. I moved to sit on the low stool near the counter, and without thinking, she joined me. Our knees brushed lightly, a tentative contact that neither of us withdrew from. I watched her hands fold neatly in her lap, fingers tracing each other, and I noticed the faint tremor in them, like she was testing if she could stay present without retreating. For a long while we didn't speak. The storm from the night before had left the world washed clean, and in that stillness, our closeness became an unspoken language. I felt her lean slightly toward me, just a fraction, but enough to know she trusted the space we were sharing. "I've never had this with anyone," she said softly, finally breaking the quiet, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Not like this. Not with someone who notices." I swallowed, the words striking deeper than any confession of desire could have. "I notice," I said, not in a boastful way, not to impress her. Just truth. Simple, human. Earned over the months of subtle glances, shared silences, and near touch. Her eyes lifted, meeting mine, and for a heartbeat, we both held our breaths. There was no rush, no expectation, just the acknowledgement that what had been building between us, slow, flawed, hesitant, was real. I reached out, tentatively, brushing her hand with mine. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let it rest there, light and unassuming, a promise disguised as nothing more than presence. Her fingers twitched slightly against mine, a subtle confirmation that she was choosing this, choosing me without words. The air shifted, heavy with everything we'd felt and avoided. And finally, I leaned back, letting the comfort settle over us like a shared secret. No dramatic declarations, no sweeping gestures. Just two people allowing themselves to exist in the same space, acknowledging the slow-burning truth of their bond. She didn't speak. I didn't need her to. The silence itself was full, alive, resonant with all the months of hesitation, longing, and unspoken care. She didn't say she loved me, but she let her guard down, and that was louder than any "I love you" ever could be. For the first time, I didn't feel the pull to fix, to chase, to interpret. I just sat there, letting the quiet hum between us be enough. Now, months later, I catch myself replaying that night in the bookstore more often than I care to admit. Not in a romanticized way, not like a scene from a movie, but as a moment of quiet truth. The memory isn't polished or perfect. It's messy, alive, layered with hesitation, laughter, and that small, electric brush of her hand against mine. I've changed. I notice details more, the little things people often overlook. The way someone smiles when they think no one's watching, the soft tremor of hands holding something fragile. I've learned patience, how to wait for honesty rather than force it, how to share space without filling it with words. She's changed too, more than I can say, and yet in ways subtle enough that only someone paying attention would see. She lets herself pause instead of moving on instinct alone. She laughs more freely in private moments. She's softer, and somehow stronger, having allowed herself to be seen without fear. What we had and still have isn't simple. It's not a storybook love, and it's not the kind of romance you can sum up in a few sentences. It's a shared quiet, the comfort of proximity without expectation, the understanding that connection can exist without possession. I often think about the letters she kept that night, the heartbreak she carried, the losses she survived. And I realize that love isn't always about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It's about being present, witnessing someone's truth, and letting them witness yours. Sometimes, when the bookstore is empty and the light is just right, I see her looking at me the way she did that first evening, the way she looked when she let her guard down. And I feel a warmth that doesn't demand reciprocation, a reminder that some moments are enough simply because they exist. We didn't rush. We didn't need to. The story of us is slow, layered, and imperfect, but it's ours. And maybe that's the point, that love, in its truest form, doesn't have to be declared loudly to be felt deeply. She taught me more than words ever could. How to notice, how to wait, how to respect what's fragile, how to hold someone without breaking them. And maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of love that lasts, not because it shouts, but because it listens. For those of you watching, maybe you've had a connection like this, or maybe it's something you're still discovering. Take a moment to notice the small gestures, the unspoken truths, the spaces where people let their guards down. Sometimes that's where love really lives. And if you've ever felt the quiet gravity of someone's presence, the pull of something unspoken, share it in the comments. Because stories like this deserve to be felt, not just told.